Hey, welcome back to the pod. I hope whoever's listening to this, you're doing well, having a great day, having a great week. I kind of just want to pick up right from where I left off last week, specifically talking about the concept of laziness today and our feelings and how they can get in the way of us achieving our goals and taking the action that we want to in our lives. But before I get into that, there's something really big that I just completely forgot to talk about last week that I wanted to, which is why social media, why I've chosen to share my I feel silly saying my knowledge. I'm so young. I'm 23. I've learnt a bit, all right? Why I'm a form of social media, essentially, and how it's impacted me on my journey of mental well-being and growth. I mentioned it briefly in my previous episode, but I started taking antidepressants in 2020, and then I was diagnosed depressed in 2021. I think looking back, the depression probably started mid-teens for me and continued up until the diagnosis. And then, sort of funnily enough, it was a few months after the diagnosis that things actually started to get better for me. There were a few things that happened accidentally in terms of there were lifestyle changes that I made that I wasn't really conscious of at the time. They sort of happened by a happy accident, and I think that was what got the ball rolling for me, and that's something that I'll do a whole other episode on. But after those initial few changes, something that started to have a huge impact on me was my social media use. And I know that social media can be a terrible place for lots of people, and it can do a lot of harm, especially if we don't or aren't able to monitor our use of it. But it can also be an incredible library of information if you choose to see it and use it that way. If you have access to a mobile phone or a laptop or any device that can connect to the internet and you have internet access, it's essentially free for you to go on Instagram, go on TikTok, go on YouTube, go on your preferred social media platform and find content creators who are making content that is educational, that is informative, that is positive, that is motivational. What I'm trying to say is it doesn't have to be this negative, scary thing. It can be amazing and it can be an incredible catalyst for change, and I think it definitely was for me. When I was depressed, there were most of the time I was sleeping in for as long as possible, and it was my sort of regular wake up time, well, not wake up time, but like get out of bed time, from what I remember, was between 11 o'clock in the morning and somewhere in the early hours of the afternoon. And for some reason, I decided it was a good idea to start waking up at the same time every day, and I started getting up at 8 a.m. What I started doing was, the minute I woke up, I would get out my phone and start scrolling, because I knew that was something that was going to keep me hooked. And so I would look forward to it enough and enjoy it enough on some level. I'm not sure if enjoying it is the right word, but it got my brain hooked, right? It was engaging. So I knew it was something that would reliably keep me awake for a good half an hour or an hour. Like I would scroll anywhere between 30 minutes and 2 hours on any given day, first thing in the morning before I got out of bed. But it would keep me awake long enough and engaged long enough that I lost the urge to just close my eyes and go back to sleep. And for a long time, I was just scrolling, not useless stuff, but it was puppy videos. It wasn't anything educational or informative. And at some point, I ended up on the health and wellness girlies side of TikTok. But eventually I started seeing healthy habit videos. One of the videos I saw was one of Shelby Sacker's videos. And I mentioned her last episode. She is, I think, an incredible human being. I love what she does. I love her content. She has a podcast called Sour to Savage, and it is all about how to actually change and implement new habits into your life. And that's what got the ball rolling for me. It was the first time I'd found someone who was educating people and sharing information that was useful to behaviour change and lifestyle change on social media. Once I found her and I started listening to her content and interacting with it, it led me to more people, and that was how I started to use social media as an educational tool, essentially. And the amazing thing about it is, if she'd have written a book, if you'd have given me a book on habits and behavioural change at that point in my life, I would have said jog on. Like, I had absolutely no interest because I didn't feel like it, and I hadn't developed any discipline, and I hadn't learned any tools to get over not feeling like doing something. I learned this fact in Mel Robbins' first book, The 5-Second Rule, and it's that according to studies, we make 95% of our decisions with our feelings and not with logic, which I found kind of mind-blowing because of the implications that it has. If there's something that we know would benefit us and that we should be doing and that our higher brain wants us to do because it knows it's in our best interest, we can weigh up the pros and cons logically, see that it is in our best interest to do it and that it would be the right decision, but then we decide not to do it because we don't feel like doing it. We make decisions based on our feelings. So when you are in a state of depression, or actually, this was my experience of it. I'm not talking for, I can't speak for anybody else's experience, but my experience of depression was because I was feeling so low all of the time. I didn't feel like doing anything other than existing and drifting through the day and doing things that would bring me easy comfort. All of this is to illustrate that handing a book to someone who is not getting out of bed until mid-afternoon and not leaving the house most days and basically not doing anything that requires anything close to resembling effort, if you give them a book and say, read 250 pages of this, like actually sit down in quiet and concentrate on the pages, why would they? Whereas if you give them a phone and a social media app that they're probably already doom scrolling on for 3 hours a day and say, oh, why don't you just watch a few of these videos? They might still not want to do it. I think if you'd have told me at the time, I'll go and find some educational content creators on TikTok, I wouldn't have been interested because I wouldn't have thought that I'd get any enjoyment or pleasure or comfort out of it. But it would have been a lot easier. Everything that I'm saying is in the knowledge that people won't change unless they want to. So everything that I'm talking about, I'm kind of already assuming that the hypothetical person in this scenario, on some level, wants to make a change. I think none of this is possible if you are hard set against changing or you just don't have any desire to. So say somebody has like an inkling of desire in them to change something about their lives, change something about their lifestyle, just get happier, and you said to them, okay, why don't you start on social media? I think that is a lot more approachable than handing people books or sending people straight into a therapy session or a counselling session, which is essentially like throwing a lot of them straight into the lion's den, or they would see it as such. People have to start where they're at and not 50 steps ahead of where they're at, even if that's where you think the starting line is. If somebody's behind that, you have to come back and meet from there. And I think starting on social media can be that for a lot of people. I think it could be that for a lot of people. Using it in a productive way can be a bridge to what you see as the starting line. Again, it's something that I'd probably like to dedicate a whole episode to in terms of how I would go about using it productively if I had to start from scratch all over again, and what habits I would start doing, like how exactly I would use it. But that's not the main topic that I wanted to talk about today. Today, I really want to get started on talking about how we can beat our feelings, how we can combat this part of our brain that will avoid discomfort at any cost, knowing that any positive life changes or personality changes are probably going to be difficult and uncomfortable at some point, so it's a necessary tool. So in case you didn't listen to last week's episode, I touched briefly on laziness and how I think you can either say that laziness is an undesirable personality trait that people have or don't have to varying extents, and it's something negative and shameful about the person. Or you can say that people who exhibit quote unquote lazy behaviour are doing so because there is a part of their brain that is very resistant to difficult or uncomfortable action, and they are just acting in accordance with that. In essence, they've not yet discovered or been able to put to use the knowledge or the skill sets necessary to combat that part of their brain. The part of our brain that experiences this resistance is called the lower brain, also known as the primitive brain, and it is concerned with the immediate moment. It's in charge of things like breathing and fight or flight responses, and it is concerned with seeking out pleasure and avoiding anything painful or uncomfortable. And our higher brain, also known as the cortex, is responsible for less immediate but no less important things such as planning and analysing, thinking, problem solving, imagining, and so on. It's the part of our brain that we can think to the future and set appropriate goals with. But of course, setting goals and following through on them are two very different things, and the following through part is made so hard because of the coexistence of these two parts of the brain and their conflicting desires. We have our goals and what our dream future looks like, and the potentially uncomfortable, not so fun things that our higher brain knows we need to do to get there. And then we have our lower brain's desire for comfort and to avoid change or any sort of difficulty, really. I also talked last week about this narrative that I've seen and heard circulating in certain areas of social media that says that people know what they need to do, they just don't want it. I think almost everybody wants change in some area of their life. Their higher brain wants the change, but their lower brain doesn't feel like experiencing the pain and the discomfort that is potentially going to be necessary to get there. I think almost everybody wants change with their higher brain, but their lower brain really doesn't feel like it. And I think that's the huge sticking point that people need help getting over. Like lots of things, I think being able to combat this part of the brain is a muscle, essentially. It comes down to willpower, which I think is something that can be built and practiced and worked on and strengthened. And there are a couple of tools that I've come across that have significantly helped me with this personally, but I would like to share. The first one is probably the least sciencey, the least logical. It's not something that I actually read or came across anywhere. It's something that I started doing naturally. I don't really know what prompted me to do it, but it has helped me enormously, and it is gonna sound ridiculous, so please stay with me, be open to this. There are specific times that I do this every single day, and it is when I get up to turn my alarm off in the morning. I use it to actually sit up and turn my alarm off. I use it to then get out of my bed. I use it to get dressed when it's cold and I just want to stay in my dressing gown. I use it to get myself out the door to exercise, and I use it to step into my cold shower every morning. I used it yesterday to hand my CV into a cafe because apparently it's the 1980s and that's how I'm going to try and get myself a job. And actually towards the end of my degree, I started using this in performance settings. I have named the voice that comes from my lower brain. His name's Stig. I don't really know where Stig came from. It just happened. I think it's probably something to do with Stig of a Dump, because I can't remember anything that happens in this book, and I did actually have to look it up because I suspected it was because Stig was a caveman, because to my mind, like, the lower brain is very much, well, it comes from the primitive name, right? It's a part of our brain that was probably a lot more useful when our daily survival relied on running away from bears and predators and, you know, having to watch people's backs at night to make sure that we weren't eaten while we were sleeping. So I think that's where it came from. And I did look it up, and Stig of a Dump is a caveman. So subconsciously, that must have been why I started referring to it as Stig. I have a morning routine that takes me between 3 and 4 hours, and I'm pretty religious with it. I do it almost every single day because I think I've experimented enough with daily habits and different routines that I know that my mood is at its best when I am awake early and doing things to take care of myself first thing in the day, prioritizing them, putting them first before anything else is able to take up any of my time or brain capacity. So I wake up at 5 every morning. I either run, usually with my boyfriend if it's dark, or I go to the gym, and once I've done that, I come back and have a cold shower, and then I do a series of other things that set me up for a great day. But those are the hardest, right? All the hardest stuff is first. The waking up early, the exercising straight away, the getting in a cold shower. I fucking hate cold showers. I hate being cold. While these things feel really difficult, they're not actually doing me any damage. But when my alarm goes off at 5 o'clock in the morning, I almost never want to get out of bed. And on any given day, I could probably very comfortably and easily and extremely happily just get back under the covers and go to sleep. Does that mean it's the best thing for me to do? No. The more you reinforce these habits in your life and the more you practice and work out how to maintain them and how to deal with the days when you really especially don't feel like doing it, the easier it gets. So it is very rare for me now that I have mornings that I wake up and I'm just like, nah. It doesn't happen so much anymore, but on the occasions that it does and the alarm goes off and I think, no, do you know what, I'm going back to sleep for 3 hours, I'm getting up at 8, I just don't feel as good for the rest of the day. And there hasn't been a single time that I've done it in the last few months that I've actually thought, yeah, that was beneficial, I needed the sleep. I've always woken up and thought, yeah, like it was nice to have, but I think I would have felt better if I'd have just gotten up and done the workout. The point here is that the things that are going to benefit us the most often do not feel like it at the time. And I think it can be really hard, especially when that voice is coming from inside of you saying, no, like, I don't want to do this. I feel tired. This doesn't feel good. Like, I feel queasy. Because even if the day before you've planned to get up at 5 in the morning, or 6 or 7 or whenever it is, or you've planned to go for a workout, even though you before thought, yeah, this is a really good idea. Like, I know it's going to be difficult, but I'll feel the benefits afterwards. You're not feeling the lower brain's reaction in that moment to the plan, and it's really hard when it gets to it. And I've definitely been through periods where it was really hard because I started to think, well, if I'm feeling this much resistance to it, like maybe my body just isn't ready for it, and maybe I shouldn't be pushing myself to exercise, and maybe I shouldn't be pushing myself to get out of bed because it felt so wrong. And I worried that I should be listening to my body more. So it really helps me to separate this part of my brain from the higher part of my brain that is acting in my best interest, and just be able to recognize which part of my body it is that I'm currently being forced to listen to. Because Stig has no interest in my happiness or any sort of successful future for me. He doesn't give a rat's ass. He just wants me to keep, breathing in oxygen, chugging out CO2, and, then he'll be happy. His job is done. But Stig isn't very good at sticking to his own department, and he tends to kind of like wander out of the office and just go into other people's rooms and start just wrecking havoc everywhere because the only thing he can think about is his survival task. When I wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and I don't want to get out of bed, first of all, usually within about 10 seconds of feeling like this and kind of going to myself like, oh my God, do I really have to get up? Could I just go back to sleep? Because it's so habitual now to have this conversation with myself, I can sort of go, oh, hi Stig, you're up, great. Yeah, sorry mate, we're getting out of bed anyway. Like there's no lions in the room, there's nothing we need to hide from, and you're not going to die if you don't get an extra hour of sleep this morning. So I recognise which part of my body it is that I'm listening to. And I also say to myself, is my survival under threat? Am I in danger from waking up early right now? It's uncomfortable, yeah, but it's not a threat to me. And the part of my brain that is telling me that it wants me to go back to bed is doing so because it is trying to protect me from a threat. But that's an error, right? There is no threat. And actually, there is a long-term danger if you are consistently giving into this voice that you miss out on building the future that you want, or even being able to achieve happiness. Because if I hadn't have put myself through massive discomfort at points in terms of changing my behaviour and changing my lifestyle and changing my habits, I wouldn't have gotten out of depression. And that was a very real threat to my life for a significant amount of time. It also just helps to keep it light. It helps to keep it fun. I think it's a lot harder to get up and make yourself do these things if you feel like you're at war with yourself in your head, because it feels so much more conflicting. Whereas if I give this voice, if I give this part of my brain a third person voice, I'm not fighting myself. I'm just fighting off some caveman who's got a megaphone and is shouting about up in my noggin. Like, that's nowhere near as difficult to me anyway. You know, once I've fought off Stig with a stick and I've gotten out of bed and I fought him off and I've got my workout clothes on and I've gotten out of the house and I'm running and I'm freezing cold and my head's pounding, but I know it's good doing me good, but Stig is up in my head whining that we're in pain and we need to stop and we can't do this and we're going to die, and I can just go, yeah, shut up, Stig, mate, jog on, your redundancy notice came in 12,000 years ago. I've said it before, I'll probably say it 100 more times, but there's no such thing as a comfortable life. Like, choosing comfort now is just delaying discomfort, and everybody's life is going to be hard in some way, and you have to choose which kind of hard you're willing to settle with. And for me, I would much rather do the uncomfortable physical things like get out of bed early and go for a run when it's freezing cold and then come back and have a freezing cold shower, knowing that it sets me up to have an amazing day and feel great for the rest of the day and be more energized and focused and just to feel happier. I would much rather deal with that discomfort than deal with the discomfort of depression. Not that those three things by themselves are what solved or, you know, cured my depression, but you know what I'm trying to say. You have to make a choice as to whether you are willing to deal with small daily discomforts or whether you want continued discomfort and dissatisfaction for the rest of your life. And this is implementable in so many things beyond like healthy lifestyle choices. It's not just about waking up early or exercising or cooking a healthy meal. You can use it to push yourself in social settings and actually step forward and talk to people. You can use it to turn up to the class that you're scared of going to. I mean, I got to a point in uni where I was just so anxious about anything related to my course. My attendance probably dropped well below 50, 40, 30% at one point. I just stopped going to things. You can use it in most scenarios as well. Anything that is uncomfortable or difficult to you, you can use these tools to push past your lower brain. It's something that does take a lot of practice. I think the more you do it, the easier it is to quickly believe yourself when you tell yourself that, no, do you know what, like, I am actually safe and I'm okay and I'm not ill and I don't need more sleep. Like, it is okay to feel this bit of discomfort and to get up and push myself through it. Like, there's not going to be a negative consequence. I will feel all right and even better for it afterwards. Another really helpful thing that I personally like to do is, specifically if it's a new task that I'm using this on. So for instance, handing in the CV. What I like to do afterwards is write down first what I anticipated would happen or might happen, like what I was scared of and what I was scared I might feel, and then write down what actually did happen and notice how they differ so that you can start to really actively analyse how flawed and misleading Stig's voice can be. Also, before I move on from this topic, I just want to go back to something I said quickly, which was I used to get really confused around the whole idea of listening to and honouring my body's needs, because I think listening to your body is something that I'd seen and heard talked about a lot on social media, but I probably hadn't looked into it enough to fully understand what it meant. And I think if you are living an extremely unhealthy or unbalanced lifestyle, or your base state day to day is miserable or depressed, essentially, I think you have to be really careful about listening to everything your body is telling you, because what you are used to is unhealthy and not helping you. So anything different is going to feel like a shock to the system, and it is going to feel hard and really unpleasant. But that doesn't mean that it's not what's best. If you are used to a lifestyle that is not beneficial to you, like, that is going to feel like comfort. But listening to that, essentially, if your lifestyle is at a detriment to you, your mental and physical well-being, you're not going to get the same benefits from listening to your body as somebody who has developed a really positive and empowering and healthy lifestyle for themselves. I really hope that's helpful and makes sense. I think just what I'm trying to say is that actually it's not dangerous to do things that do feel uncomfortable sometimes. It can feel like, this is not good for me, I don't feel good, I feel sick, I feel unwell, but that is not always actually going to be the case. And a lot of times, certainly when I've felt that, when I have felt like I'm ill, I need to stop, I cannot run any further, I have carried on, and I have felt absolutely incredible when I've gotten home from those runs, having pushed myself and proven to myself, actually, I felt that bad and I was still able to keep going. Like, what else could I achieve? So naming Stig and talking to Stig every day has been so helpful in allowing me to follow through on the promises that I've made to myself and continuously implementing the behavioural and habitual changes that I've wanted to. But if you need to go back a step before how to keep yourself going, and you need to start from, no, how do I actually start changing my behaviour? And if I had to go back to the beginning of my journey in terms of my journey to a better mental state and a better lifestyle, if I had to start from scratch without any of the knowledge or skills that I have now, I think the first thing that I would want to go back and relearn would be about habits, and specifically the habit loop. I learned all of that information originally from Shelby Sacker's podcast, who I've already mentioned. It's I can't remember if I said the name of the podcast, so I'll just say it again. It's the Sad to Savage podcast, and it is all about habits and behaviour change through habit implementation. It's entertainment and it's educational, and I think it helps it stick with you. And obviously she's not the original person who did the research into habits or the original person who wrote them down. There's the book Atomic Habits that a lot of you have probably already heard of, by James Clear, which is all about habit change and like the actual systems that you can use to change your habits. And before Atomic Habits, there was The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. However, the thing that is great about podcasts specifically, I think, is they're arguably a lot easier to get on board with, definitely initially, because it is easier to just listen to something as opposed to having to sit down and read a book. I think it has the potential to be more fun, more entertaining, obviously depending on your personal preferences. But I think for a lot of people, a podcast is probably a more accessible route into this kind of information. And there's the added benefit that you don't have to set aside time specifically just to do that thing. Like if you're reading, you can't really multitask at the same time. Whereas if you're listening to a podcast, you can be listening to it while you're commuting to work or cooking or doing household jobs or going to the supermarket. So if you're someone who really wants to make changes but feels really short on time, that is a really good way to start to prioritize it. The other thing that I do and use daily that I want to talk about is the 5-second rule. It was coined by Mel Robbins. She's written a whole book on it. I mentioned it earlier. And it is essentially a 5-second countdown that she uses to get shit done that she doesn't feel like doing. If you don't know who Mel Robbins is, because I didn't until about 2 years ago, I think, she is one of the biggest female motivational speakers, I think, in the world. And she has the #1 ranked educational podcast on Spotify worldwide. She describes it in the book as a metacognition tool, which essentially means it's a technique that can be used to combat a part of your brain which is working against your goals. So it's literally like having like a mental internal baseball bat to like smack Stig in with and tell him to fuck off. No hate to Stig. Actually, I forgot to say this earlier. There probably is like an actual like sciencey or psychological reason that referring to a voice in your head in the third person is helpful and works. I just haven't come across it. Like, that's not why I started initially doing that. But if anybody happens to be listening and knows if or why that is the case, I would love to know. So write me a comment if you want to. I'd be interested. But before I talk about it, let's talk about this thing called the complexity bias. It's essentially the human tendency to settle upon and favour complicated solutions to our problems as opposed to simple ones. One of the problems that arises from it is that it contributes to avoidant tendencies in terms of we avoid starting something that we want to or feel like we should do because we think that it's more complicated to start than it is. And I feel like I'm always using the example of exercise, but it is just really applicable here. Like, people decide that they want to get fit or they want to get healthy and they want to start working out. But there are hundreds of options for how you can move your body and get into sport. And they think that they have to find the optimum workout split, the optimum routine. And they make it so much more complex than it actually is. Whereas if they'd have just started doing anything, started walking, started using the treadmill, literally just picked something and begun, it would have been so much more simple and they'd be much better off. But the reason I mentioned it is that when we're feeling really crap and shit about ourselves and the world, and we feel like our problems are insurmountable and they're larger than life and they're unbearable and they feel like really complex things up in our head, right? We think, well, it makes sense that if there's a solution to all these problems, it's going to be elusive and difficult to find and difficult to understand, and it's going to be really complex, right? Wrong. Something else I'm nicking from Michael Smoke. I don't think it was actually him who originally said this quote, but it's him that I heard it from, and he uses it all the time, and it's that 90% of our success can be boiled down to doing the most obvious thing for an extraordinary amount of time. If our lifestyles are causing us distress, or there is something that we are consistently getting stuck on and holding ourselves back from doing, there isn't necessarily this grand solution that there has to be a heroic or difficult pursuit to find. It's not something that the lucky few happen across and are able to understand. For people who are living a life that has set them up for success and is built on difficult habits, they're doing that because most likely they started small and they stuck at it and they increased the incline on their progress inch by inch. So the actual tool, and you are going to have to fight your complexity bias while you're listening to this one, but if there is something that you don't feel like doing or something that you want to do but self-doubt is creeping in, you don't want to get out of bed, you don't want to get up and go to the gym, you don't want to get out the door and run, you don't want to step under the cold shower, you don't want to approach and talk to a stranger. Anytime you don't feel like doing something or self-doubt creeps in before you attempt to do something, as soon as you notice that that's happening internally, you start an internal countdown, you go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and on go, you move, you take action, you get out of bed, you put on your running shoes and leave the door, you step under the cold shower, you put down the phone and stop yourself from ordering Mackies, and you go to the kitchen and you cook yourself dinner. Do something, take action, move. Again, I used it at the end of my degree. Before I had to go on stage, I gave myself that little internal countdown. It gave me a moment of control, because it is much easier to start an internal countdown than it is to step under a cold shower or get in a cold plunge or walk out on stage. It almost acts for you. It sounds really odd, but that's my experience of it. So like when I have a performance or a recital, like exams specifically, where it is just me walking into a room and starting playing, my least favourite bit is the wait. I find once I've started playing, I'm usually fine, but I feel horrendous beforehand, and I hate the waiting, and I hate the not being able to control, like when I start and go in. And I used to find it so difficult, this idea of waiting backstage and having someone come and say, oh, you can go in now. And it was like, I was the one who had to physically move my feet and walk myself into that room. Like that for me was the hardest bit, was just saying to myself, you have to move now, and getting into the room. Saying to yourself, you have to move now and go and play on stage in front of people in an exam setting, which is something that you categorically do not want to do, is a lot harder than saying to yourself, you need to count from 5 to 1 in your head. Like that's easy. Anybody can do that. It's not uncomfortable and it's not difficult. So I was almost convincing myself that I was doing an easy thing, when really I wasn't. Like I was still doing the same thing. I was still walking into the room, but by saying to myself, okay, you're going to start the countdown now, it made it that much easier. This can be used for literally anything, and it works because the longer we think about something, the lower our urge to act on it becomes. And that's because hesitation sends a stress signal to the brain. So essentially, Stig jumps in, takes the steering wheel, slams the brakes on and puts us into protection mode. When we start thinking about changing our behaviour or doing something that is new or scary or uncomfortable, the brain opens the floodgates. Well, Stig opens the floodgates because Stig's a knob to all the thoughts and fears that could potentially stop us. And it tricks us into thinking things through, aka staying stuck where we are, because Stig is scared of new, scary and uncomfortable things. That's the neurological reason why it's so hard to change. But the 5-second countdown works because it interrupts your default thinking, or whatever the hell Stig's doing. It distracts you from what he was doing and what he's saying to you, and it locks you into a different course of action. And inaction and hesitation in themselves are learnt behaviours, so with practice of this tool over time, you can learn to override and displace your brain's natural and default protection system, and instead default to pushing past your feelings and choosing action anyway. I think I've been using this specifically for maybe coming up to a couple of years, and I've used it so often and I have so much trust in it now that it has genuinely become involuntary at points. And I mean, because most days I plan my day the night before. So when I wake up in the morning, I know exactly what I've planned to do, and it's very easy. I just go boop, 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 and I follow everything that I've written down step by step. But there are some times that I go out in the evening, or like, I don't know, my day before is just a bit busier and I don't get down to actually planning things. And especially if I've been out for a late night and I decide to not wake up at 5, say I wake up at 7, I won't automatically wake up and think, oh, it's time to run or it's time to go to the gym, because I'm like out of routine. Like the cue in my habit loop essentially isn't where it isn't what it normally would be. Like the cue is in part the alarm going off in the morning, but in part it's the time. Like I know when I wake up at 5, it's exercise time. Whereas when I wake up at 7, it's kind of like, oh, what do I do now? And there have been a couple of times, specifically in like the last month, where I've noticed, like there was one morning I was working super late. Like I got back at about 3 a.m. and I hadn't planned my next day. And I woke up at, I think, 9 o'clock. And I was lying in bed and I was like, well, I don't really know what to do. Like, do I want to run? Do I not? Or do I want to like get on with work for the morning? Like, do I really need to be running today? Or could I leave it to the afternoon or evening? And I was lying there thinking about it. And I literally kept in my head, I was going 5, 4, 5, 5, 5, 4, 3, 5. Like this loop just started in my head. And I was like, oh my God, like I can't switch this fucking thing off. And in the end, I was like, do you know what? I'm going to run. It almost decided it for me, because some part of me recognised that I was hesitating on something that I knew I should be doing. If I didn't know that I should be doing it, like if I knew that actually I had better things to do that day than run. Like, I would have known that and I would have gotten out of bed. I think it's because I knew I should be running, but I didn't really want to, but I was lying there feeling that conflict. So some part of my brain recognised that and kicked me into action mode, because that for me has become habitual. And it was great, and I got up and I went for a run, and it was absolutely the correct decision, and I had a great day. When you get in the habit of using that countdown, and the countdown itself becomes habit for you, it makes it so much harder for you to get away with not doing what you know will benefit you. But that is the result of literal years of using it. And I did find it effective when I started using it. I don't think there was ever a time when it just like didn't work, because I think I had a degree of humility, to be honest. Like, it was at a point where what I was doing clearly wasn't working, and I got to a stage where I was willing to try other things. You have to get to a point where you can get past the whole, like, oh, it's just a corny American, like, motivational thing. It's not going to actually do me any good. Like, if you try and use it, but you're saying to yourself, this is rubbish, this is a waste of time, how is this going to help me solve any of my problems? It's not going to work. It's a simple tool and a simple solution that can solve simple problems. It's not going to cure your depression, because depression is a massively complex issue. But if you're able to break it down and say, well, getting 1% better in this one specific area of my life, be it health and wellness and fitness or something else, if I could improve just a little bit in that area of my life, that would help me towards feeling better overall. And it is definitely a tool that can be used to help you make very small and simple changes. So I think part of it is perspective as well. You have to be open to breaking down your huge problems into smaller little ones and use it one step at a time. Just use it to get out of bed in the morning, use it to put your shoes on and go for a 5-minute walk once a day. If that's all you can do, or if what you can do is less than that, that's okay. Just use it to do something. I think any degree of change, or any time you're trying to do something new that you haven't attempted before, it takes a massive amount of humility, because you have to accept to a certain degree that what you've been doing up until now hasn't been working, or you wouldn't need or want to change. You know, you wouldn't be looking for alternatives. So if you decide that things aren't worth even trying before you've given it a shot, and you're not proactively finding something alternative to try, then you are playing an active part in keeping yourself stuck. I'd actually probably go as far as to say that humility is maybe one of the biggest components in successful lifestyle change, because it requires you to let go of preconceived judgments. You have to be willing to actually put your all into something and accept and embrace the fact that there are going to be things that don't work for you. Like, this might not work for you. It works for me. That doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody. But there will be things or something out there that does work for you. But you can't be scared of trying things and failing. Like, you can't avoid the things that aren't going to work for you. I think it's a really necessary part of the process to trial and error and to learn firsthand what doesn't work. That requires a huge amount of humility. You have no way of knowing whether something is going to work for you or whether it's relevant to you before you've even tried it firsthand. If you know that this is something that you are going to struggle with, genuine suggestion, go and listen to an American podcast. I cannot tell you the number of friends and family that I have tried to get onto Shelby Sacco or somebody else, and they listen to it and they're like, oh yeah, but she's just annoying, she's so American. I fully accept that they probably just weren't interested and they didn't want to listen to the podcast that I was suggesting them. But if you are someone who is genuinely wanting solutions and looking for them, but you refuse to put up with listening to an annoying American girl for 30 minutes, and you are not proactively searching for alternative sources of information or education, I quite literally dare you, just listen to an episode. 30 minutes of your life max, 20 if you put it on 1.5 speed. It's probably the most risk-free form of exposure therapy to things that you have already decided aren't worth your time or are just going to be difficult or annoying. Worst case scenario, it pisses you off and irritates you and you're put in a minorly bad mood for 5 minutes. Best case scenario, you learn something. I think almost anybody that I know would have something to learn from that podcast. Listen to episode 1, start at the beginning, her podcast is, at least to start with, like, it's kind of chronological. It makes sense to start from the beginning. But she's also done individual episodes on self-love, eating habits, relationships. So if there's something specific that you're interested in, like, have a look through, see if she's spoken about it. Just try and have an open mind with these things and have some humility. Humility is underrated. I don't think you can go wrong with it. And I think I'm going to leave it there for today, partly because my voice is killing me. I feel like the back of my throat is shredding. I'm not used to talking this much, and I can't tell how long it's been because, to be honest, I'm doing about 5 takes of every other sentence. I think it's going to take me a while to get used to like this style of talking, but I hope something was useful today. If anybody listens to this and names their Stig or names their lower brain, leave a comment down below and tell me what you call them, because I'm genuinely interested. Go and listen to Shelby Sacco or Mel Robbins, and please come back next week and listen to me, because that would make me very happy. I hope this was useful to at least one person. That's always the goal. I just want to help one person with one bit of information. And I hope you have a great week. Hope you have a great rest of your day. I love you. Thanks so much for listening if you've gotten to this point. And hopefully I'll see you next time. Bye.